All right, my fellow chess morons, today we take one step closer to becoming chess masters. We're going to learn another pattern that you must know. I'm combining a couple of ideas here. I'm going to try to move quickly so the video is not too long, but also hopefully be precise and clear. So I'm going to try to combine those two concepts. The first thing we're going to talk about is called Zugzwang, which I will define shortly. The second one is called the opposition. The third one is called the red carpet. We're going to combine all of those in chapter 4, combining those ideas. So this position is two kings and how they relate in the end game. So for the sake of this first hypothetical, just pretend this pawn is not on the board. The only reason it's there is because in order to move these kings, Lead chess requires me to have an actual chess position. Otherwise, I'm not able to move pieces. So just ignore this pawn for the time being. So if I said to you that it was white to move and white wanted to reach d8, you might notice that these three squares between the kings are controlled by both kings. So these sort of three central squares, or three key squares as Silman would call them, are blocking white from advancing to d8. So notice that any move that white makes is either horizontal or backwards. And basically any move that white makes is not really improving their position, and in some ways could be hurting their position. So that concept in chess is called Zugzwang, which is a German word that basically means it's your move, and any move you make hurts your position. So you don't want to be in Zugzwang, and you do want to put your opponent in Zugzwang. Some examples of Zugzwang are with very few pieces on the board. That's typically the case. But there are some epic versions of Zugzwang where there's a whole bunch of pieces, and even with all these pieces on the board, um, one of the players is still in Zugzwang. Some people refer to this as immortal Zugzwangs, which are very cool to study, but that's a separate discussion in a separate video. So notice that if it's white to move here, there is no way to get past these three squares, and any move that white makes will help black. Or any move, I shouldn't say it will help black, it will not help white make progress towards d8. The opposite is also true. So because these three squares are controlled by white, if it were black to move, any move they make would be helping white. And that is the case in this particular hypothetical. So now I'm flipping it. Let's call this black to move. If black makes a move, notice that this key square has been given up, and now white can enter the position. Same would also be true if black were to go this way. This key square has been given up. White can enter the position. And finally, this gives up all the key squares. But in this situation, white would want to move forward. So the first concept to understand in this is that Zugzwang uh, benefits us if our opponent is in Zugzwang because they're making a move that actually helps us. It's a little counterintuitive because you'd assume that in most games we want to make a move, but chess is unique in that sense that some of the positions you actually don't want to have to move. Okay, so the second concept is called the opposition, and it relies on that concept of Zugzwang. Someone has the opposition if there is an odd number of squares between the kings, and it's the other person to move. So I'm going to say that again, an odd number of squares. In this case, that's 1. But notice that that could be 3. So if our king was actually here, white would have what's called the distant opposition because there would be 3 squares between the kings and it's black to move. You could also hypothetically have the opposition with 5 squares in between. That's a lot of circles, but you get the idea. So if the kings were here with 5 squares in between, you would technically have the distant opposition. I'm not going to go over that today. It's more advanced. I'm just putting it in your head so you fully understand the idea of opposition. So circling back to this position, since it's black to move and there's an odd number of squares between the kings, white has the opposition. Having the opposition is a good thing because it allows us to enter the position in some way. We're not sure how yet. It depends on what black does, but we want to have the opposition. So the key to a lot of king pawn endgames is to gain the opposition against your opponent. Okay. Also notice that you could have diagonal opposition. So if the black king were here, there's 1 square here. White would still have the opposition in that case. That's, again, a little more advanced, but just planning that in your head. Okay, so we've gone over some concepts here. Now let's see how this actually plays out. So white's goal is to control the d8 square. I know there's no pawn that would actually matter here. I don't even want the pawn on the board because I just want you to think about the kings for now. Again, we're ignoring this. Okay, it's black to move. These are the 3 key squares. We know black's in zugzwang. We know that white has the opposition. Anywhere that black goes, white can retain the opposition. So the first thing is if it's as simple as this, white still has the opposition, still odd number of squares, it's still black to move. If black were to go here, note that white has regained the opposition and is making more progress towards this. And the final option would be if black were to go here. Okay, we've regained the opposition. By the way, in all these videos, there's going to be different variations in general. I realize I can't go over every single variation because otherwise these would be like hour-long videos. The long story short here is if you keep the opposition, white will eventually get control of d8. So again, black to move here. White now gains this. And notice we retake the opposition. And regardless of where black goes, we now have gained control of these 3 key squares, but mainly the d8 square. So we have used the fact that we have the opposition and we retain the opposition to get control of the key square, which is d8, and these 2 key squares, d7 and d6, which we're about to get to in a second of what we refer to these as. Okay, so instant replay. Notice that if black or if white were to, say I did something like this, instead of stepping up, say I were to play this move, notice that now black has gained the opposition. Black has gained the opposition because there's an odd number of squares and it's white to move. So white has now screwed up this position. So the pitfall to fall into, that's a weird sentence, the pitfall to avoid for white when you have the opposition is to make sure you can keep it. The simplest way to do this here is to say, okay, I want there to be an odd number of squares with him to move or her to move. I'm going to play d5. Keeps the opposition. I'm not going to go over every single variation like I said. This is the basic idea. So before we move on to the next chapter, you have to understand this idea of an odd number of squares with the opponent to move. If you don't understand the opposition, pause me, go back over that, maybe play around with it on lead chess until you're at the point where you understand this idea and you've sort of played around with the movement of the kings a little bit. Okay, cool. Moving on to the concept of the red carpet. Okay, the red carpet refers to the key squares. When combined, we call this a red carpet because you're making a red carpet for this pawn to promote. So in this case, the red carpet is d6, d7, d8. If white's king can ever get to a square that controls the red carpet, then white will win, assuming black can't find some way to take this pawn at an earlier phase. And assuming there's not like, some bishop or some knight that's affecting these situations. But in this current construction, and this is a real position, so now I do want you to look at this pawn on d5. This is black to move. It doesn't matter who it is to move. Because white can get to this square, it will control the red carpet. So the moment we can control the red carpet in a king pawn endgame, we want to do so, and we will win if we can control the red carpet. So even though it's black to move, now that we control this at all, there is nothing that black can do to stop us from promoting this pawn. The only way to sort of blunder this as white would be some move like this. And this actually still might win because of the opposition, but that's not really the point. Say we did something like this. This would be how to blunder this position. So the moment you can get control of these 3 key squares, we want to do it as quickly as possible. It's also way simpler to do it that way rather than trying to calculate some version of the opposition when the kings are here. So red carpet describes 3 key squares. We want to control them and then push the pawn. And then the final piece would just be like, just obviously don't push this pawn until the king controls it because this is a draw. All right, that is the red carpet. I realize that's a lot simpler than opposition. We're now going to combine those 2 things. This is a position where if you're a high enough rating, you might know the key sort of twist to this position. But if I were to ask you, is this winning for white or is it a draw? And just to be clear, since white is the only one with a pawn, only white can play for a win here. Black cannot win. If that isn't clear to you, then these videos might be a little advanced at this point, just because black can only win if they have a pawn on the board or other uh, minor or major pieces that can combine to checkmate. So in this situation, white is playing for a win because it has a pawn. Black is playing for a draw. The key piece to whether it's winning or not is to understand who has the opposition. So if this is white to move, black has the opposition, and this is technically a draw. Technically meaning black has to play optimally, but black can save a draw here even against, Stockfish or Alpha Zero or the best chess player on earth. There's no combination of moves that white can make to stop this from being a draw if black plays properly. If this is white to move, sorry, if this is black to move, excuse me, I misspoke. That means white has the opposition. Um, and if white has the opposition, this is now winning for white. So again, we come back to the idea of the opposition. We want the opposition, which means if it's black to move, that means white has the opposition because there's an odd number of squares between the pieces and it's their move. And in this case, we're playing white. So same exact concept. The goal is to get this pawn to d8, just like we talked about. We're going to build that red carpet. In order to do that, we have to use the opposition. So when black moves, and again, this is black to move, which key square has been given up? That should be pretty obvious to you now, but if it's not, just ask yourself, of these three squares, which one is black no longer controlling? So we play king c4. Note that black's best attempt here is to retake this center square. If you ever are in the middle of doing this and you sort of get lost in the sauce and you can't remember the sequencing, remember that you want to keep the opposition. The way to blunder these positions is to lose the opposition. So we know that we are back and we have the opposition once again because it is them to move. There's an odd number of squares. Same deal. We will now take the key square that they have given up. Note that if black went forward, we would just take this. We would not play this if black had gone backwards. So again, the way to blunder this is if they go backwards, we're not taking the opposition anymore because black can now do this and they have the opposition. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to take advantage of the square that black has given up. So again, okay, which square of these three is now available? This one. Here, we keep the opposition. One square in between us, odd number of squares, them to move. Okay, black plays here. We play here, here. And these moves, it doesn't matter as long as we keep the opposition. We'll now go here. Note that we still haven't controlled the red carpet. And the moment black allows us to control the red carpet, now we're ready to push our pawn. And I know the question you're about to ask is, well, wait a second, isn't black going to run down here? If that's ever the case, just keep the opposition, one square in between, odd number of moves, and we can push. Oh, I made that a little more complicated than it needed to be. We get the opposition back. Sorry, I gave myself a annoyingly difficult hypothetical there, but you get the idea. Just don't get so far that you can no longer protect this pawn. Okay, notice now we have the opposition back because it is an odd number of squares and black to move. And the moment black moves, we now control the red carpet. And we just promote the pawn. There's nothing black can do here. And that's actually a good example as I'm mid video of like, oh, wait a second, is this king going to run down and take this pawn? If you're not sure and you get lost on the sauce, just retain the opposition. Even when you're doing this, blitzing it out with 5 seconds on the clock, as long as you retain the opposition, it'll be easy. Just repeat and you're good. Okay, so, and if, by the way, in my hypothetical, I played here, but if black were to play this, notice that we still have controlled the red carpet. Okay, I hope all that makes sense. I am going to make a separate video that explains how to defend as black here if it were white to move. Because again, if this were white to move, black would simply defend and you would not be able to promote this pawn. That's going to be a separate video. But the key thing to understand here is that if you're given the opposition in this position with the king in front of the pawn, white can win if they keep the opposition and eventually push their pawn and create a red carpet. Just some real quick overall thoughts to go over, and this is helpful to sort of put in your memory bank of just like visualizing positions that you know are winning or losing. This situation would apply, meaning it would be a win on all of these squares, but not on the A and H files. And that's because once the king reaches this, there's no way to dislodge them without it being a stalemate. So if this pawn were here, 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 and I were to apply this similar construction, it would be a win for white, assuming you have the opposition, meaning it's black to move in this situation. The other final piece here is that if you ever have this position, meaning there is a gap, any number of gaps between this. So this is two gaps, this is one gap. This is winning for white regardless of who has the move. And the key difference between this position and this position, sorry, is that I have a tempo to use to regain the opposition. So I'm not going to go through every one of these variations, but basically the idea is the reason this is automatically winning regardless of whose move it is because I can conveniently use my tempo to regain the opposition depending on where black moves. Okay, I know I'm throwing a lot at you. This is opposition, Zugzwang, red carpet, all in one video. I don't want it to be too long, so I'm going to try to shut it down here. Just one point on king pawn endgames in general. Number one, they are notoriously difficult, despite the fact that there's very few pieces on the board. They can be extremely complex. I think studying these positions is very, very valuable, both from a perspective of just being pragmatic and like wanting to win this position rather than drawing it, but also when you study them, you're going to start understanding the movement of the king, which is very helpful in endgames in general. If you're ever not sure what to do in an endgame, using your king is almost always a good place to go. Number two is just like, because these are complex, don't be hard on yourself. If you blunder these positions, it's not some like, how in the world could I have blundered this? It's supposed to be a win. I still blunder these positions all the time. So don't stress about it. It's very hard. Just learn from it. It's okay if you blunder it. It's not the end of the world. We're all going to blunder these difficult end games. Um, and the final piece would just be even if everything I'm saying in this video makes sense and you're visualizing it and saying, like, okay, what Tommy's saying, I see his point and I think I get it, I would still put these positions on the board and play them against Stockfish until you can convert these positions and make sure that you've kind of played around with the pitfalls and the traps that you can fall into. And it's possible that, like, if you put this position, Stockfish is going to do something funky like this, and then you kind of have to say, like, okay, what do I do here? Like, how do I make sure I regain the opposition? This type of stuff. So it's useful to kind of um, get in the sandbox here and kind of play around with things until you make sure and test yourself that you do actually understand it. Okay, I hope this is helpful. This is really, really key. This is the low-hanging fruit of chess improvement, in my opinion, is getting better at endgames. I hope you enjoyed it. And as usual, this channel is new. I'm trying to get as much feedback as I can on ways to help people improve, taking on more students, more clarity in these videos, making sure I'm keeping things simple. If I say something that is confusing or complex, please let me know. I will elaborate on it either in the comments or honestly just redoing the video because that's my goal. I want these to exist so that people can come back to them. And please reach out, comment, like, subscribe, all the things. You know all that because it helps me. It helps me grow and it helps me get better at this. So I appreciate it. Have a good one, and I hope we are all collectively one step closer to becoming chess masters.